mai kaunalipo, mai kaunalipo, mai kahikina, mai kaulana. E hele mai o e atu e hele mai e ku, a hina, a tangaroa, a tāne. E hele mai e kanaha, e kanawai. E hele mai o e au makua. Mahalo ke akua. As above, so below. May it be on earth as it is in heaven. Please, give us this day and forgive us. Please, help us to forgive. Please, no temptation and no evil. Mahalo ke akua. May we be a blessing to each other. Mahalo ke akua. May you be a blessing to us all.
Of the raping of the land, of prejudice and superstition, such things have no place in Bali. Listen to my heart, and it speaks to me of danger, of danger. I have watched the tides of change.
Good morning. Good morning. It's Sunday morning, but you knew that. You already knew that. And Sunday morning is rapidly becoming my favorite morning. It's when we get to sit down with a bunch of friends and take a look at what happened this week. Hey, what happened this week? You know, a little bit of hindsight always goes a long way. So, thanks for joining us Sunday morning. Even if it's late and it's Tuesday and you're watching on YouTube, I get it. It's still always in my heart Sunday morning. So, please join me and a couple of my friends here for a Sunday morning chat. Welcome to Hindsite 2020. Good morning, fellas. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Tattered,
Zoom this morning. Oh, my apologies. I hit the wrong Zoom. I keep hitting the logo. There you are. Mr. Ramsey Tom, good morning to you. And Jimmy Love.
Aloha.
Jimmy, good to see you.
Good to be here.
I tell you, what a week, huh?
Yeah.
I didn't think anything could top the coronavirus. You know, but the news just keeps getting bigger and better. It's this is an amazing thing. And instead of feeling more agitated and more ramped up, I'm conversely feeling more sort of relaxed and settling into the flow of, you know, everyday life in the new world order, which seems to be disorder. You know, but that's an old formula. Order out of chaos, right? Create chaos first and then bring us the order so we all sort of fall in line. Good morning, Bali. All right. Yeah. No, that's great. We all sort of fall in line. And this morning, more than ever, it's good to see you guys, you know, because what we're seeing unfolding across the nation, ooh la wee, like I said, I didn't think we could get news any more exciting than what was happening already. And yet, somehow the world has turned another page. It's gotten even crazier, right? It's like, when we see 4 nights of violence that remind me more of 1966 and 1967 than anything I've seen recently, I can't help but think to myself, we're finally going to conclude the Civil War. And it's something I've been waiting for a long time. I mean, historically, Abraham Lincoln gets shot. The Army of Virginia loses, not the rest of the armies. The rest of the armies don't lose nothing, right? It's just Virginia and Lee that get defeated. But they're kind of like the marquee guys, you know what I mean, near New York and Baltimore and D.C., and so it kind of goes like that. They're the actually only threat on Washington, D.C. is the close Virginia army. Once they're done, D.C.'s comfortable. The war is going to continue until some hothead shoots Abe Lincoln, right? Now he shoots Abe Lincoln. He changes the entire context of the story. Again, the mythos shifts. And suddenly the Confederates are running south of the border. And France pulls its funding from the American Civil War, right? And now England gets to pull its funding from the north side too, and now it's in a recovery. Now we need economic development. All this stuff is historical. We all know it happened. But what we fail to talk about is some 20 years later, all the Confederate soldiers that went south of the border to Mexico that no longer had funding support all drift back into the country, into Texas, and then slowly make their way into what is now Idaho and Colorado and Wyoming and all the way up the coast. And so the Confederate soldiery comes back into the United States, only now they're in that third in the mountain region. They're all up in there. And then they spread out to the Ohio Valley and Michigan and Minnesota. And now we get to see the same conflict reoccurring in the country. Only this time, the Confederates are everywhere. They're not just lumped down to the southeast, where there's military tactical advantage to isolating them in the Gulf. They're everywhere in the country. And they get to bring up this sentiment. And now the Americans get to decide, just who the heck are they? Right, exactly. It's like, are we the peace-loving, let's invite the weak and the frail and join us here in the land of the free? Or are we really marching to our own drum and following the eagle the way we've always done since Rome and just walking out, taking what we think is rightfully ours? And gosh, shouldn't those other worldly citizens work harder so they can get more, you know, sort of like we do? So, welcome. Good morning. Sunday morning. I didn't think it could get any crazier. This morning, I really want to hear what you guys think about what's going on. Because my personal take is, we're sitting on a powder keg. And the person at the fireside chat who should be leading and calming the nation is playing with matches. You know, so it's like, oh, where are we going? In hindsight, this week has been crazy. You know, so it's like I really want to find some sense in it. And I want to make sure that everybody gets the sense that I don't feel agitated. I actually feel like things are slowly unfolding to reveal our subconscious little underbelly of this United States of America to all of us, right? And so we should just welcome the experience and then engage in conversations, avoid the violence, you know, and find our way forward together, you know, and particularly here in the Pacific region, we should look at our physical approximate distance to these conflicts, right? And really debate whether or not that pala or opala should be sitting on our table at all. At all. Lastly, let me say, The reason I created this program is not only here in Hawaii are we able to take a different perspective about this conflict we're witnessing in the United States. Black Lives Matter, this, that. Long before the Civil War in 1844, we had already established no slavery. We had already established rules against this kind of commerce, against this kind of global behavior. In this moment, in Hawaii, if we demonstrate, not just to the United States, but to the rest of the world, a better way of being, we can finally make use of all that photogenic capacity of Hawaii, right? We can finally, for a good reason, put the word out there quickly in the world that here in paradise, we refuse. We will not belittle other human beings. Here in paradise, all of us matter, right here at the table. And one planet, one ocean, right? We're all in paradise. We just got to get them all to wake up. Okay, that was my preaching Sunday morning. Sorry. I'm out. Buddha, Jesus, I'm out. Let me hear from you guys. Ramsey, take us on a ride.
Hey, first of all, good morning, gentlemen. Aloha.
Aloha.
As you say, Kalani, given this last week, it's good to see you. Because you never know, right? As they say, we're never promised another day. So, but there is promise in every day. And I think that's what we've got to look towards, is the promise of what's to come. But more importantly, what we need to do about it. But there's so much to go over. This was just like a crazy week, like you said. And as we talked about last time, the cyclical responses that we haven't really gotten out of that thing, right? So here we are, 2020, and part two of that. But I think in retrospect, we've got to think during that Civil War, that's when Hawaii got pulled in.
Ew.
Right? So what many of us may not realize is that our economy that we're talking about now in many ways was directly connected to that Civil War.
Thank you, brother.
Primarily sugar and pineapple, primarily
Thank you,
sugar.
brother.
Right?
And food.
So, we may be distant, but we're connected. So everything we've been talking about is critical. Just because we're observing it doesn't mean we're not part of it. Right?
And we were part of the first round.
That's right. I mean, the fact that the South was not delivering sugar to the North is what brought Hawaii in as a source of that, which of course had everything to do with the rail system out of the West Coast. All of that's connected. We cannot see that as separate concepts, right?
If I remember military history, Atlanta was the rail center. And so transportation was dominated by the French and the Confederacy down in the bottom. And so this idea of needing the overland railway never became more obvious than during the Civil War when they couldn't get goods into the far side of the country. So you're absolutely right that this impacts the United States directly.
Yeah, and as a Hawaiian kingdom, we were pulled into it because of the business interests of being able to promote the sugar, which of course led to the consolidation and Pearl Harbor and all these. So they're not separate instances. They're all connected. And so what goes there, we're kind of like the end of the chain, right? To your point, the tail wagging the dog.
Wow, when
it snaps, it snaps.
You jumped right in where I thought we would end up 20 minutes from now, which is, the story has not changed. It's going to end here. The story is still the same. They're going to push and promote. This is why we're having 106 hearings. This is why they're repositioning military bases here. It's about taking control of the marketplace. This time, it's not the South. It's China, right? This time the line is on the other side of where we're sitting in the Pacific. Not just us, all of our Pacific relatives. And I think that's what makes this track of conversation timely. It's
I'm throwing the pebble in the pond. It's a little bigger than a pebble right now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I'm with you.
But the ripples have been hitting us for a long time. So I agree with you. I think this is a time where we have to tie it off, right? Or as we discussed last time, are we compliant or complicit? Which is it going to be? And we have the opportunity. But, and I like Pauli's perspective about the paradigms and where we are historically and from which perspective, which view, which lens is going to drive us. You know, are we driving by looking into the rearview mirror, or are we actually looking ahead and being proactive about it? Because really, we're still in reaction mode, responding, right? 200 years, whatever that might be.
Pauli.
So, I mean, I pass it on to Pauli. Pauli, good morning.
Good morning. Aloha, aloha.
Aloha.
This is I've been watching this with great interest, and what I listen to though are like Ramsey pointed out, are perspectives that are being pushed out as principles, as truths.
Right.
The problem with perspectives is that it creates a particular view of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the paradigm issue, is once you lock into that particular view of reality, you tend to see what you want to see. And you selectively screen out what doesn't fit your reality. In essence, it's like Gareth Morgan's Images of Organizations. It's you essentially create a psychic prison. And that's where your head's at. Mm-hmm. That drives your behaviors. And this is why it's so difficult to reconcile calling for justice and engaging in acts of injustice. So I look at that, and people, they react. I understand the energies that drive Black issues, and which is really the focal point of this ignition. But there are other issues of inhumane conditions. The worst, I think, of the nation are the Native Americans. But they're reacting to it in a very, very different way. And I think a lot of this is culturally oriented. The last thing they would do is burn their villages. That's their very source of livelihood, and that's where their elders, that's where their family is. So burn your village to advance a point is illogical in a cultural perspective. And of course I can't help but perceive things from a cultural perspective, because my cultural perspective is not unique, but it's how I view my reality. Sometimes our solutions are and our techniques are completely incomprehensible to modern minds. So when we say aloha, it has we believe the healing power of aloha. It's different from the curing power or the fixing power. You know, curing means removing all evidence of the disease. But healing is returning you one to a wholeness. And until you can get to that healing point, you're confusing the cure for the heal. And so you continue to burn your villages. That's sort of my take, but I certainly understand the passion. But unless that passion can be led by wisdom, we're going to let knowledge outrun wisdom, rather than slow it down so wisdom can catch up and then take its proper place, which is to lead.
And, you know, cultural lensing is perhaps the most intelligent way to view this. And so America's strength as a collection of cultures, just as Hawaii's strength was a collection of cultures, can also be perceived as its weakness. You know, this collection of cultures, everyone being allowed at the table. And culture becomes an interesting focal point. I myself, you know, was involved with the culture of law enforcement, security work, military work, intel work, as you guys know. And that's a particular culture. You know, I still work in the EMS, emergency management community, where a lot of old dogs go to, you know, to lay down, as we say in the business, right? But Jimmy Love, talk to me about that, because I know you and you know me, and I know you got 30 years in the trenches, you know, in civil service with PD, and that crossover too, the paramedic, you know, the first responder, the guy we talk about who gets there before the big red wagon, you know what I mean, who gets there a lot of times before the blue and white shows up. You know, so tell us about that unique culture. And what I mean by that is I've posted and seen pictures of white police officers, fully blue, kneeling with citizens in community. And when we see that in response to the GFO moment, you know, I can't help but think that that's symptomatic of something really wrong, systemically, institutionally, with these cultures. So enlighten us, if you can, about your personal experience at this particular moment.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here again. I missed last week. And as usual, my biggest pleasure is sitting and listening to the perspective that you guys bring, the historical and cultural perspective, because my personal experience is limited in that area. So I had the distinct honor and pleasure of working for the public for 30 years as a firefighter paramedic. And of course, right next to us or right below us, the policemen, the sheriff's deputies, as they were called where I worked, just like here in the Big Island. And first of all, I got to say, you know, people always say how great the firemen and paramedics are and a tough job, and that's all true. But a police officer or a deputy is the absolute hardest job to do that I know of, because they have to deal with the worst side of humanity. They have to step into family battles. They have to deal with people who are absolutely crazy, and their life is in danger many, many times. But that set up an interesting situation. In the last, well, now it's been 45 years since I started working as a firefighter. And in that time, there was a transition in the police force and of course, now I'm talking about my personal experience. I'm not Black and I'm not living in the inner city, okay? But in my white bread,
thanks for pointing that out, Jimmy. Thanks. That was such a transparent move.
That explains it.
My experience was in California on the coast. My family is, 6 generations California, and there are pockets of like here in Hawaii where people understand the spirit of aloha, and all lives matter. But mixed in there, like you were pointing out, Kalani, is a tremendous variety of philosophical and moral thought. So here we went from in 1974, where most of the police officers, and I'm going to make a little easy definition here. A good police officer, I would categorize as somebody like Andy of Mayberry. Okay? He's there to help somebody. The not so good and even the bad police officer is there to be somebody. They want to exercise the power they never had. And unfortunately, municipal administrators, they're not thinking about the quality of human being that's out there doing the most difficult job in the world. They're thinking about putting somebody in that spot. They're thinking about saving money. So what you end up with is a whole bunch of guys who are under-trained, under-protected by their bosses, by the administrations, and they're sent out to battle, okay? At one time, a piddling wage, okay? Well, you get to wear a gun and a badge. What do you need money for? So
take what
and
you
everybody
need.
turns out, and when some of them get shot or killed on duty, everybody turns out for the photo op parade to show how much they care about their police officers. Well, why can't you train them and pay them so that you're not attracting just the guys who want to be somebody, and you get more of the guys that want to help somebody?
Ew.
So what happened in the 70s and 80s was that the guys who came onto the police force, because they were looking for a job and something to do to make money and support their families, if they weren't the kind of guy who had the social experience and training to be good at this job, to be good at being Andy of Mayberry and diffusing volatile situations rather than throwing gas on them, they were afraid by this work. It's scary work. So what they did is said, man, I don't like this, but I don't want to lose this job. So what can I do? Well, I can become an administrator. And they get on this administrative track. And they act, the guys that aren't good at the field work become the guys who direct the field work. And that's where we went from Andy and Mayberry to an armed pseudo-military force, because they're protecting themselves and the police force against their own fear. And so we've transitioned now into police forces all over the land. And don't get me wrong here, there are still amazing police officers out there who do amazing work and know exactly, intuitively almost, how to diffuse volatile situations and keep everybody safe. Unfortunately, it appears as though they're outnumbered, and it's not just appearance; they're outnumbered.
Thank you. You want to put an informal percentage on that? I mean, I'll take a gander. I worked for years in the industry. What do you think are the percentage of mediation trained, right, capacity built peace officers, people who actually trained to do what was intended by the job? Well,
now that intention, as I said, has been shifted by the guys who are not good at the job. So if you're going to talk about who's actually been trained, the percentage becomes much lower. If you fold into those guys who do the job well, those who have an intuitive sense of how to do that, then it gets better. Right. You're looking at maybe 75-25. 75, I want to be somebody. 25, I want to help somebody. But the thing is, it's all within our power. It's like we can send trillions of dollars to banks and Wall Street to keep them afloat, and nothing goes to Doug Jones on the street. Dow Jones is doing great, but as Jim Hightower says, Doug Jones is eating dust.
Right.
So if we have it in our capacity to change these things, but our leadership, as we can see, has fallen behind. They're behind the curve. They're not the visionaries that we hope for as citizens. And frankly, this whole COVID thing, I think, is what sparked the reaction we're seeing this week to the police, because everybody's dissatisfied with our leadership. So where does that floating anxiety go? Well, geez, another captive, another suspect, another criminal even, is wrongfully dead. And it's like throwing a match into a smoldering, vaporized keg of
Ayo.
flammable fumes.
There's no winning Minneapolis. I mean, I can't see an upside, right? It's like it has nothing but this spiral decay in terms of the relational aspects of civilians to authority, governance to their own operations people. I mean, we're watching municipality there in the Great Lakes region really struggle with civilian reaction to municipal authority. But we're seeing it spark responses in other major metropolitan areas. This is like what we saw in the 60s, you know what I mean, coming to the early 70s.
People are fed up. And like you mentioned, the great thing is when you see a handful of police officers in uniform standing on the side of the dissatisfied public. And it really does show that, well, again, the problem we have is we're looking at it through the media filter. And the media, of course, is controlled by economic interests. So our view is limited. Our view of what's going on is limited by what they allow us to see, basically. You got to really read between the lines and look for alternative sources to get informed, and not just, like Doc says, sit back and believe your own perspective and reinforce your own perspective with what you see in the media. And that's a challenge that we all face, because it's easy to think you know what's going on. It's comfortable. It's a safe place to be. You know, when you think, I don't know what's going on, now you're not feeling so good. And so it takes a lot of courage and determination to broaden your perspective and to see other people's perspective.
You know,
I'm preaching to the choir here, I know. But,
I keep going back to my grandfather's remarks of the moon always being half in shadow. You know, this idea of porno, of balance, right? And that, in fact, when we see these other perspectives, it's because of our unique position. We think the moon is going through phases. This is very easy to explain to children, right? You think it's going through the phase, but really step away, change your perspective, look at the moon again. It's half in shadow. You know, it's always half in shadow. And I'm beginning to think, because of this disease and my need to learn to walk again, the 4th time in my life, this life, you know, balance becomes everything. And balance is far from static or that levered position of the Libra scales. You know what I mean? Balance is something more akin to water and air. You know what I mean? They're moving together. They're both comprised of pretty much the same elements, yet one of them has this soluble, tangible, feelable self, and the other one is more amorphic. But somehow they keep interchanging like the waves on the shore, right? Balance is all about these tiny little adjustments that you're making. So this is really going to be something.
I just want to close with my particular viewpoint on the solution to the police problem and our politician problem. You know, there's been this thing floating around the internet for a long time, the 28th Amendment or whatever it is. It talks about the Senate. It's a bunch of bad information, basically. But people have the thing that, well, our senators shouldn't get paid so much. They shouldn't have all these perks. It's people don't realize that when you become a politician or a policeman, you take that job home with you. This is not a thing where you go home. Well, I know there's some representatives that just go home and shut off the whatever, but it's very difficult for human beings to leave those volatile environments and not take that home with them. So it's a tough full-time job. And I take the opposite viewpoint of making them, you know, live like we do. Well, they do live like we do. They get perks that the average person doesn't get. But honestly, if you want to solve the problem of corruption and people in power for the power and not there because it's a calling to serve their fellow citizens, pay them $1 million a year. And if they take money from somewhere else, throw them in jail. Make it profitable enough for people, because there's people sitting at home that would be great leaders, but why would they want to be? Why would they want to put themselves in the line of fire like that, in the line of social fire, for that piddling amount of money? Well, they don't. So they get the job, and then they figure out how to wrongfully raise their salary, you know? So I say pennies on the dollar with what it would cost us to solve this problem as a nation, because all you have to do is attract better people to the position.
Yes. And I mean, I love this structural out of the box thinking. I've thought this for years. Set term limits. So pay them $1 million a year for 10 years. Because in 10 years, you can do a program. You know what I mean? You can see a problem. You can dissect it. You can think of the fix. You can begin to initiate the fix. Not this 2-year, 4-year, 6-year. I can barely get anything done. And no more 50 years. No more 50 years. I get to be there and marry the military machine and A8 and Super A8 and create like, I don't know, the most expensive roads in the world that don't even cross a state, don't even reach another state, and call them interstates. You know what I mean? Just go completely against English definitions, but use the handle. You know, and it's just amazing, you know, just amazing. So yeah, Hawaii, we're involved with this craziness that is the United States. There's no way we're not going to be involved. I think it's 1873 when General Schofield sends a tiny little memo back to the United States. He's in Hilo. He's traveling with Lunalilo. They're looking over what is known as Byron's Bay. Byron's Bay. That's what they used to call Hilo Harbor. Right? And they're sitting there and they're discussing whether the Americans can turn it into a naval harbor for resting ships. And in a secret correspondence, right, General John Schofield writes back and says, you know what we need? We need Pearl Harbor. We need that fish pond. We need that one on Oahu. Do anything you must, by any means necessary. Less than a year later, Lunalilo is dead. And they're replacing him with a merry monarch. You know, somebody who's going to agree to give them that harbor. And it still takes some years to ratify, because even back in D.C., people are going, foul, what's going on? And they got to beat their own United States debate. So, everybody here in Hawaii, no, we don't get to be out of this argument. We've been in this argument from the beginning. GFO, this George Floyd outrage, this moment, as Pali is saying, that leads people to burn down their own villages. This is another symptom of systemic, institutional injustice. So now I've just pointed out 2 concretized symptoms, and we're not even talking about the obvious fires and that demonstrate that clearly there is something structurally unhinged in the American model of democracy. Pali?
Well, you know, I learned a really valuable wisdom from my grandmother when I was, I think it was about 13 years old. I come from a descent line of warriors that are known for their violence and brutality. Very brutal. And there was a council of chiefs meeting, and I was bothering my grandfather, so he told me to go with my grandmother and get me out of the way. So while I was sitting with my grandmother, I was looking forward to being regaled by the wonderful violence of our great warriors. And And so I was sitting there eagerly waiting to hear what she had more stories to tell. And I asked her, Grandma, who was our greatest warrior? And she said, our greatest warrior, interestingly enough, didn't have a war club, which is our principal means of dispatching an enemy. You need to look them in the eye before you brain them. Said, how is it that, how can you be a great warrior without a war club? And she said, our greatest warrior never killed anybody. I was stunned. And they said, meanwhile, I had these images of heaps of bodies just all of a sudden evaporate. And then what really shocked me was when she said our greatest warrior was a woman. And her name was Salamasina. And my daughter and great granddaughter named after her. She is known for bringing healing as the forefront of leadership. And it was during her reign that the great voyages started, the arts, also almost like a Pax Pacifica emerged. And it's a lesson I have learned, and it's a wisdom I pass on to my children. So when it comes to violence, because we speak peace and healing, don't mistake that for weakness.
Yo.
Right.
But we speak from a wisdom that has passed down, and we wish to share with all who would listen. And then she would go back. Is the basis of that wisdom is alofa. And alofa in Samoan is the same thing as aloha. So that's part of that's my paradigm. In fact, if anything, I have paradigm paralysis because of my sense and belief and embrace of aloha. So when I see these kind of tensions, my first reaction is, how can we heal? How can we bring more aloha to this? Stop burning your villages.
You. Jimmy, how you see your cousins in blue reacting to this moment? That's a real moment for the country.
They're between a rock and a hard place, and they always have been. And to have the courage to step away from the pack and demonstrate your allegiance with those who you serve is an incredible step of courage. And for those guys that you were talking about, Kalani, before the show started, that have that courage, that there's so few of them, shows how the system is in trouble, you know. And I know that there are many more who can't muster enough courage to step across that line, who have sympathy, honest sympathy, and sympathy for the people and dislike for the way the system works. But again, caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. You know, I did a bunch of work years ago at Spark Matsunaga Center of Peace, Gandhi Institute, Amnesty International. We're looking at what's the real cost of global conflicts, military conflicts. Now, Amnesty International, they ended up settling on a number. You know, and I'm not a numbers guy, but I watch the numbers. Demographics matter when it comes to image shaping. But they say 10 to 1. 10 to 1. 10 women and children and civilians are casualties for every armed combatant casualty. Now, that being the case, when we had the last American Civil War, 620,000 armed combatants were killed. That means 6 million women and children and unarmed civilians were also killed. Now, those numbers are not kept by history. Go figure, right? Go figure. How come they don't keep track of the civilians that die? But those numbers being projected would suggest that if we engage in this kind of behavior nationally again, we will lose 100 million Americans, 1/3 of the country. So this doesn't make this discussion about the tensions being fueled, what appears being fueled by reports suggesting that the white supremacist, white racist market is dressing up as civilians and going to these cities and creating the violence and setting the fires, all in the wag the dog, strategy of igniting this civil war, of finishing this thing that they started so many years ago at Fort Sumter. They truly believe in their hearts this is a land for the whites to reign supreme, and the rest of us, and they gathered here from around the world. Even in 1947, they started recruiting and gathering again. Here in America, the promised land that God has delivered to the whites to rule over the world. This is a strange phobia within the United States right now. But if we play it out and try to answer this question the way we answer it historically, I'm suggesting we could lose upwards of 80 to 100 million Americans trying to get the answer to a question. So I'm suggesting we try to engage in conversation, find some other way to solve this problem. Ramsey?
Yeah, Colin, I think the concept is, if you don't count, we don't count, right? And so everyone you're talking about doesn't count in the minds of those counting. And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is rooted in an accounting system. Well, we are talking about a lens of accountability. And when you're not holding people accountable to their behaviors, then they're going to continue to use the accounting systems that don't account for the human condition, but in fact has made accommodations for the acceptable losses, right? Acceptable losses. And when we start saying it's acceptable to lose 10 to 1, then we begin to predicate all of our practices and behaviors on that premise, right?
Yeah.
Which then edifies and grows basically the symptom that we're all talking about here, which is an underlying symptom of victimhood.
Okay, and
if 10 people in every room are concerned about being taken out, you can only develop a victimhood in mentality in that room, right? And fundamentally, if we ask ourselves, what is it about me that created this condition versus what is it about you that's pissing me off? That shifts things, right? What is it about me that allows me to see in you what bugs me about you? That's different than saying, what is it about you that pisses me off, right? At some point in time, as Pali says, internally we have to look at ourselves and say, what is it about us that's contributing to this condition? And or how do we disconnect from the Akka, as you said? Because the Akka is not just a connection, but it's a mirror. Akka is a reflection. So as I look into this pond and see myself, I cannot erase myself from the pond by slapping my hands on the pond, right? And we keep thinking that if I stab myself, I'm going to hurt you. That's kind of where this is. That's what you're talking about, right? I'll show you and start stabbing myself in the leg, right? I think there's a part of us we have to recognize is that we are operating from a lens of judgment, whereas our kupuna, when they went to the ocean and they looked at the sea to determine what the day was going to be like, or if they looked at the moon and the sun, they didn't judge the practice or the behavior of the sun, the ocean, or the moon. There was no judgment. It was an assessment, right? My behavior today is predicated on what's going on. I'm not going to judge it. If there's any judgment, it's about me. And unfortunately, we can't see ourselves well enough, so we have to put it outside. So we're operating in a world of externalities, to Jimmy's point. If we keep monitoring our own behavior by what's going on around us, we are always going to be victims. Because we're waiting for the externalities to change in order for us to change. And the minute I adopt the principle that says, until you say sorry, I'm going to be bad. Until you make it better for me, I'm going to be poor. We're always going to be relying on the outside to fix us on the inside. And fundamentally, we have a system that continues to look at the externalities. That's why, to your point, this comes right out of the playbook. What these guys are doing now is not new. I mean, we can go back to yellow journalism. We can go back to all right, inciting propaganda. And so it's this isn't a judgment, it's an assessment, right? It's not an indictment, it's an observation. We see it, call it what you see it. Now let's figure out what it is. But then we got to figure out what am I doing to contribute to this? Right? And we cannot fall back into the fear part of it, because the minute we step into the fear part of it, we become part of that victim mentality. Right?
I'm feeling
and
hopeful.
I think that's important.
And I'm feeling hopeful on account of what you're saying. You know what I mean? When we're talking about accounts, it's like if we all account for ourselves and what we bring to the party, right? That's the moment of shift. So I don't mean to get metaphysical, but here's the deal. Is it the moment for each particle to decide what part of the wave they're going to be? Or whether they move with the wave at all. I mean, I watched video of waves of protesters barricading police vehicles in the middle of the street, only to be later run over by police vehicles in the middle of the street. Well, logic would dictate if you walk out into the middle of the street with a barricade and stand in front of a moving vehicle, you're going to get run over, right? So I don't know why everybody's acting surprised about cause and effect. I do know that these actions and inactions are being used to ramp up the conversation. And I gotta wonder why, right? And I think to myself, if I'm an elite 2% and I'm looking at conditions in the country, both economically and resource-wise, and the global picture, I got to think the loss of 100 million people is not a bad idea. Could stabilize some things.
Yeah, consider this. We're talking about what's fueling this, right? And again, everything is connected. So if we go back to the idea that a lot of this was based around the petroleum industry and all of the things that go off of it. I mean, the military.
Which, by the way, was 1840 to 1850 was the same moment, right? The death of whale oil, again Hawaii involved, and the birth of Pennsylvania oil fields, and suddenly the shift in the industrial package, where London's whales no longer ran our factories, where France and England are no longer profiting from the existing American structure. This is something I think few Americans study.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Real horses need grass. Iron horses need fuel, right? So we go to the iron horse. Think about that, right? Everything comes out of iron, steel, so-called the thing that helps us, that moves us forward. But it created like another codependency. This is about fuel. It was petroleum. And now as we move away from petroleum, there's still the need to control a lot of this stuff. And we just saw that when we weren't driving around for the last 2 or 3 months, you couldn't sell oil, right? The numbers dropped below zero. So we do know that something, and that kind of got some people shook up, right? Nobody believed that they would ever get to a point of demand that would be like that, right?
Right, and some people were basically in that 1%. In that 1% that dominates 86% of the marketplace, right? It's like they're the guys that got a little upset at this.
Yeah, so this is root to fruit, right? You got to figure out, if we start with poison root, we can get poison fruit. And I don't know how many generations you have to go down before that's out, but it's not, we're kind of perpetuating that. So already the responses are poisoned by the roots from which this discussion comes, right? So it's important for us to step back and make sure that, one, we're not talking out of the same Kool-Aid glass that everybody else started drinking out of in a long time. And we're extensions of that, right? So I would question, so what's the fuel that's igniting these things, as you said? What are the accelerators? What would happen if we kind of just put some helium into it instead? Right? Just
pretty
kind of pump some
prevalent
helium.
element, right? Helium, pretty prevalent. What if we take the populace? What if we put something else in it?
Yeah, what if we lift it, right? Give it some helium. Can you imagine what a riot would look like with people on helium? Hey, stop it! You go that way! Stop it! Right? I mean, I think it would be hilarious. So let's
Well,
add
they
some
talk
humor to
about
this
raising
problem, right?
the vibrational rate, right? Raising the
That's right.
vibrational rate, right?
Exactly. 'Cause let's get a little lighter here, right? So let's throw some helium at it, right? I think we got to kind of really think outside, and we've got to laugh at ourselves at some point in time, because at somebody someplace is looking back at this and going, what a joke. The joke's on you, right? You have no idea how deep this goes, and we're all part of the joke. And unfortunately, we've got to get out of it. And when you start hearing world leaders say, that's not how we play the game, we already know the fix is in, right?
Wow.
We're all part of a game that other people are playing. We're the pieces being moved. And at some point in time, you just get off the board and they have no way to play. And I would suspect that some of these people are really establishing, I want to be heard. You're not listening to me. So like a little child, I'm going to drop the glass.
Ew.
And if I can't, then I'll break the glass. And if I can't break the glass, I'll kick your, an assumption. Right? So I think we really have to be careful. Is that, as Paulie said, if we look at this through the lens of law, we begin to see the Akka, the mirror, the Akka that connects us to all of this.
Ew.
Right? Otherwise, we fall into the same trap that everybody else is in, that suggests that this is just a continuation. And if it is, what's the continuation? That Hawaii's constitutional law was based off of Mississippi and Louisiana law, right? And so for any of us to say that we are not connected to this is ignoring that historical perspective.
Ew.
That's the root that created the fruit we're now eating from, right? And that's where we come back to food sovereignty, right? Indigenuity.
Exactly.
We need to plant new seeds. We need to heal the soil, because no sense planting new seed in bad soil. And at this point in time, it's soil remediation. If we're going to create a whole new system of nutrition versus calories, and we cannot begin to continue, as Jimmy said, looking at the news as the nutritional value that's going to give me energy for the day.
Yeah.
Because frankly, it's just calories. We're just filling ourselves up with bad information.
Yeah.
No nutrition behind it. It's not providing me with anything of goodness, right? It's a different growth model. What are we really growing here?
I keep
Anyway,
thinking, just
I'll get on my soapbox.
just because you stack up mud, that doesn't mean you can actually grow anything, right? You actually got to do like a soil sample, use your spectrograph, figure out what your mineral count is, what's the exchange rate of livelihood, the chemical imbalances. This is a tricky thing, life. This morning, I wanted to talk about us food belting Oahu. From Waimanalo all the way up Ko'olauloa, all through Wailua, the farming districts, back down Waianae to Honouliuli. You know what I mean? And really grow food to assist in the food security, the sustainability of Oahu. And what? In hindsight, all we can talk about is George Floyd and the outrageous behavior of angry, hurt, damaged, historically traumatized Americans acting out centuries-old violence for the world to see, right?
Well, as Jimmy said it earlier, right? The Floyd thing is just a representation of what has been there all along. This is not just one guy's neck. It's everybody feeling that I got to get you. You've been standing on my neck too long.
Oh yes, Oklahoma. 1920s.
I mean, that's fundamentally what it comes. That's the metaphor.
This has been setting up for a long time. I mean, when the white Americans burned down an entire African American city, when they burn down towns in Florida because they can't see the African Americans succeeding, you know what I mean, while they struggle. And then the federal government just looks the other way because it's enacting racist policies like the New Deal, you know what I mean, setting up white families to move into suburbs, sentencing minority families to live in the inner city and suffer the abuse that comes with their kind of mental stress. So this has been going on for a long time. It's taken over even our lives out here in the middle of the Pacific and has for centuries. For centuries, the Americans have been out in the Pacific causing decay. Now, when we look at the compact treaties and we look at failing nuclear holdings and we look at the environmental nightmare and we look at the military presence, all this does is lead us to what is obvious. A global world war beginning to brew in the Pacific between China and the U.S. and being fueled by creating this tension at home. You know how the U.S. since 1870 has solved every economic problem it ever had? It went to war. It goes to war. And through the war machine, it creates economy. And we're watching it happen yet again, gentlemen. And we're sitting here and going like, oh no, I think this is race relationships. This is failed global economy. And oil producers, as Ramsey was suggesting, needing to create a market need immediately. Nothing sells oil like a good old war, and we've known that since 1860. So,
that's right.
The American Civil War is back for us, gentlemen. What are we going to do as Hawaiians, as Americans? Forget all those titles. As human beings, with children, with families and daughters and sisters and grandchildren, what do we do, gentlemen? What do we really do in this moment? And I hate to put it on you, but it's our closing moment. So go around till next week and tell us how we saved the world. Starting with you, Rams.
Well, I think it's understanding that it's that underlying algorithm that's affecting us all, to your point. And we've got to look beyond that. We've got to look at the purpose and the reason. Find your purpose before it finds you. And our purpose is our great-grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And the reality is we are caught in a predicament right now because we are judging by what we see versus by what we feel, right? And we can't let what we see, we have to look through it, not at it.
Ew.
And that's the problem. We're looking at it and we're acting. We've got to look through it. And in order to look through it, you have to have a different set of lenses and a different set of values. And as Paul Lee says, a different set of principles.
Ew.
I'm out.
Thank you, my brother. Jimmy Love, show me that love.
I couldn't agree more. You know, it's important for people to realize that, at least consider the possibility that the soap opera we see on our media is a distraction so that they can legalize tyranny while we're all fighting amongst each other, you know?
Palu.
And we got to look past that, as Ramsey says, and Doc, like you said, we have to look at ourselves and our own dark side before we look out onto the world and try and figure out what's going on. We have to realize that the dark side is with us all the time, and it needs our attention. Our personal dark side needs our personal attention. And stop looking at the TV and start looking out your window at your neighbors who need a hand, you know?
Thank you, Jimmy. Pali, take us home.
Ata in Samoan is fa'ata, which means mirror or reflection. And it doesn't surprise me at all that we're islands thousands of miles distance, but we carry that fundamental principle. Another great warrior in the tradition of Salamasina is Mahatma Gandhi. And I love what he had to say, be the change you wish to see in the world. But I'd like to close out with, ultimately, it comes down to leadership. regardless of your institutional structures or anything. It really comes down to leadership. And in the context of Salamasina, good leaders lead, great leaders heal.
Ayo, ayo.
Yo.
And I love the way you said curing. You know, curing is not healing. Curing is what we do to a side of beef. We hang it for like 30 days and we wait till stuff disappears, usually those little white flies. And then, then we smoke the meat, as we say. So I don't want to be cured at all. I want to be healed. And maybe if we brought to heal our local constabulary, we could actually heal some of our community. As Jimmy said, if we had a little less of these, how they say in Japan, pencil dick, of these small little minded people trying to exercise their junior prom angst by putting on the blue and getting out and terrorizing. And these days, they put on flak jackets and they're running around with automatic weapons. This is not Andy of Mayberry. This is not what we're seeing. So, gentlemen, thanks always for joining me on a Sunday morning. We're out of here. I'll catch you next week. Love you. People,
Aloha.
here we go. We're going to be sending you home with a little intergenerational song. I think Ramsey was right. It's really about the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren and how we connect. And so this is us a little while ago down in Lapoi Hoi playing a bit of music. You all enjoy. I wrote this one night when I was sitting around here. I was thinking about the intergenerational transfer of knowledge. Because it's not just about the knowledge, right? It's about whether or not it moves between the generations, whether it moves intact, or whether they actually understand the relevancy. So it's a little autobiographical. My apologies. My tutu kake was a wise old man. He lived his life naturally. Morning he worked the logging. Evening he fished the sea. Came along my aina. Takes the dedication. Love of a woman, good friends, and close family. The life we live in, locals only. Don't you forget, the best things in life are free. My grandfather works the fields all day. He works the mill most of the night. Works to provide, he's got bills to pay. He's gonna do what's right. He says, hard work for those what ain't got no education. He says, heartbreak for those who can't find their way back home. The life of labor, locals only. So find you a local girl, at least you won't wind up alone. My daddy drives a rich man's car. His favorite color is business suit blue. Works to provide me with the finest schools anyone can abuse. He says the language you use, boy, strictly locals only.
Better brush up on your skills. You're gonna need them when you're on your own. When I dropped out of Berkeley, I did the studios in LA, and I spent a few years in New York. I played Tokyo and London, I played Carnegie Hall, and of all of the gigs that I can recall, you know the toughest ones hang a sign on the wall. Says locals only. They want locals only. I got a wife and a mortgage now. No, he got it on the way. And when he said,
Hey, Pop, what do you know?
this is what I will say. I'll say, hard work for those what ain't got no education. I'll say, heartbreak for those who can't find their way back home. The life we're living, locals only. Find you a local girl, at least you won't wind up alone. Give us one, baby. He's a wise young man, lives his life naturally. In the morning he works to a driver, in the evening he serves country. Malama Aina takes deep dedication. Don't you forget, the best things in life are free. Never forget, the best things in life are free. Matutu Kane was a wise old man.